Well, well, it looks like our not-so-educated daughter-in-law, the plain and boring one, is about to bless us with her singing, my mother-in-law said with a smirk. Come on, step up to the stage, you ugly duckling, she sneered. It was my sister-in-law's wedding reception, and somehow I had been pushed into singing a solo. This wasn't unusual. My mother-in-law always seemed to find a way to make me feel small and humiliated, even at happy events like this. Her need to embarrass me whenever she had the chance was something I couldn't quite wrap my head around. What's taking so long? Hurry up, she said, sounding more impatient. Her voice grew sharp, and I knew I had to move quickly. Okay, I'm coming, I said softly. I stood up and slowly walked toward the stage, feeling everyone's eyes on me. My name is Emily, and I'm 34 years old. I live with my 5-year-old daughter, Jessica, and my husband, Eric, who's also 34. We've been married for 8 years now. I was orphaned when I was little, and my grandparents raised me. I chose to live on my own when I was older, leaving high school early to work at a local factory. Eric and I met again at our high school reunion when we were 22. We hit it off right away and started dating. 3 years after he finished college, we got married. Since then, I've been taking care of our home, raising our daughter, and working part-time to help out while supporting Eric in every way I can. Mom, teach me how to sing, Jessica asked me the other day. Eric and I hadn't planned on pushing her toward music or anything like that, but Jessica showed an interest all on her own. I used to be the president of the choir club back in high school, and singing has always been one of my favorite hobbies. I even take voice lessons now, just for fun. So when Jessica asked me, I was more than happy to help her learn. I dream of the day we might sing together as a family. A few days after the wedding, we returned home, and my mother-in-law called. As always, she found a way to criticize me. Since she learned that I didn't finish high school, she's constantly made comments about my lack of education and my family background. Hello, is Jessica there? She asked when I picked up the phone. I'm sorry, she's at her singing lesson right now. I replied without thinking, realizing a little too late that I had said something I shouldn't have. She's taking singing lessons? And you didn't tell me? You really don't think things through, do you? She said, annoyed. I'll teach her myself, she added firmly. Now, my mother-in-law has an impressive musical background, but the way she talks down to me when it comes to music and education drives me crazy. She loves Jessica, but I'm worried her strict methods might push our daughter away, just like they did with Eric and his sister when they were younger. Thank you for the offer, but I want Jessica to have her own freedom with this, I told her. Well, I still think it would be better if I taught her, she said before abruptly ending the call. Months went by, and I nearly forgot about that conversation. But then, one day, my mother-in-law came over to visit. It's been a while, hasn't it? How's Jessica doing? She asked as she walked through the door, immediately picking Jessica up without much of a greeting to us. It just so happened that Jessica had the day off from her voice class, and all of us were home. Granny, I've gotten really good at singing, Jessica said proudly. Really? Let's hear you sing something then, my mother-in-law responded. I felt a knot form in my stomach, worried about what she might say after hearing Jessica sing. How about we eat first? It's lunchtime, I tried to suggest, hoping to delay the moment. Don't interrupt. Let her sing. My mother-in-law snapped at me. Go ahead, Jessica. Sing for Granny, I said softly. Jessica started singing, and I stood there, feeling uneasy. From my mother-in-law's perspective, as someone who graduated at the top of her class from a prestigious music school, Jessica's singing probably seemed far from perfect. But to my surprise, when Jessica finished, my mother-in-law clapped. You've been practicing a lot, haven't you? Well done, she said, smiling. I sighed in relief. For once, she wasn't making any snide remarks, and Jessica looked so happy to be praised by her grandmother. Eric leaned over and whispered to me. I was a little worried about what Mom might say, but it turned out okay. Later that evening, Jessica fell asleep, so I picked her up and took her to her room. When I returned to the living room, my mother-in-law was waiting. Emily, don't you think Jessica's singing was terrible today? It's a waste of money to keep sending her to those lessons if that's all they're teaching her. I'll take over and teach her myself, she declared. Anger rose inside me. I turned to Eric, hoping he'd back me up. Wait, isn't that a bit selfish? I asked him. What about what Jessica wants? She's so excited about music, and if she's forced to learn under too much pressure, she might end up hating it. Eric was quiet for a few minutes before finally saying, Mom, go ahead and teach Jessica for a while. I couldn't believe my ears. Was he serious? How could he just agree like that without considering Jessica's feelings? I was furious. All I wanted to do was wake Jessica up, grab her, and leave. So, I guess this means Jessica will quit her voice training classes now, right? My mother-in-law asked with a triumphant smile. I stood firm. Fine, but this is not a music conservatory. Don't do anything that Jessica wouldn't like, I said sharply. I know what I'm doing. After all, I'm not uneducated like you, she replied coldly. That evening, I let my mother-in-law leave without saying much. Later that night, my husband, Eric, apologized for his mother's behavior. But I was too upset to even look at him, let alone have a conversation. I ignored him and went straight to bed. The next morning, I went to my daughter, Jessica, and said gently, Sweetie, from today onward, instead of going to your voice lessons, Grandma is going to teach you how to sing here at home, okay? Her face fell. She looked sad but didn't say anything. She just nodded, trying to be brave. I felt guilty the moment I saw her expression. I'm really sorry, Jessica, I whispered, hugging her. Around noon, my mother-in-law showed up at our house, all smiles. Jessica, starting today, Grandma is going to teach you how to sing even better, she said with enthusiasm. The lesson began shortly after, but within an hour, things took a turn for the worse. My mother-in-law's teaching style was harsh and demanding. She began criticizing Jessica, expecting nothing less than perfection from a 5-year-old. You're doing it wrong again. You're making the same mistake. Do it over, she snapped at Jessica, who looked more and more discouraged as the lesson went on. I couldn't hold back any longer. Mother-in-law, this isn't what we agreed on, is it? Could you be a little gentler with her? She shot me a cold look. What are you talking about? I am being gentle. Why don't you go do some housework quietly, something you can barely handle anyway, she said with a sneer. For long hours passed before the lesson finally ended. My mother-in-law stood up, satisfied. Well, see you tomorrow, Jessica. Make sure to practice what we went over today, she said as she left, pleased with herself. As soon as she was gone, Jessica sat in her chair, looking miserable. If I'm going to get yelled at like this, I don't want to sing anymore, she said softly. My heart broke for her. I felt a deep anger toward my mother-in-law for ruining something my daughter had once loved, all for her own pride and satisfaction. I made up my mind. This couldn't continue. The next few days were much of the same. My mother-in-law continued her strict lessons, and Jessica became more and more withdrawn. After about a week, Jessica finally came to me and said, Mom, I don't want Grandma to teach me anymore. I don't want to sing. I wasn't surprised. Her grandmother's teaching style was too harsh for her. You don't have to force yourself, sweetie. If you don't want to continue, that's okay. You don't have to go back to Grandma's lessons, I reassured her. I paused for a moment, then asked, What about going back to your old voice class? You liked it there, right? Jessica's face brightened. It was clear she didn't hate singing. She just didn't like how her grandmother made her feel. Would you like to go back? Asked again. Jessica nodded eagerly, and I smiled, relieved that she hadn't lost her love for music. The next day, I called my mother-in-law. I'm sorry, but Jessica has decided to go back to her original voice training class, I explained. My mother-in-law was furious. How can she give up after just a week? You've raised such a weak-minded child. This is all your fault, she yelled. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. That might be true, I replied, but Jessica told me that she prefers her voice teacher's style. Maybe it's because your way of teaching is just too strict for her. My mother-in-law continued ranting, but I didn't listen. I hung up, feeling satisfied. It didn't matter how many awards she'd won or how prestigious her background was. In the end, her own granddaughter preferred a different teacher over her. After that, the visits from my mother-in-law stopped altogether. I felt a sense of relief. That evening, I told Eric what had happened. I spoke to your mom and let her know she doesn't need to teach Jessica anymore. Jessica doesn't want her to. Eric looked apologetic. I'm really sorry, Emily. I didn't realize how bad things had gotten. I thought she wouldn't be so strict with Jessica, but I was wrong. His words eased some of my anger, but I was still upset that he had suggested letting his mom take over Jessica's lessons in the first place. I was so mad when you agreed to let her quit voice lessons for this. I was ready to scream. I admitted. Eric sighed. I know. I should have backed you up from the beginning. I'm really sorry. In the end, I decided to forgive him. Thankfully, Jessica still loved music and was happy to be back in her class. That's what mattered most to me. 2 weeks later, Eric brought up something unexpected. My sister is getting married next month, and she asked if we could perform at her wedding. I raised an eyebrow. What kind of performance are we talking about? I'm planning to get a few of my band members together and do a small concert, but my sister also wants you and my mom to sing with us, he explained. I wasn't thrilled about the idea of singing with my mother-in-law, but I reluctantly agreed. So, I'll be singing with your mom? I asked just to be sure. Eric nodded. Yeah, that's what my sister wants. The thought of performing alongside my mother-in-law made me nervous, but a part of me couldn't help but wonder, what if I sang better than her? What would she say then? I started practicing right away, preparing for the performance. However, my mother-in-law didn't seem to be doing the same. Mother, aren't you going to practice? I asked her, curious. I don't need to practice, she scoffed. I'm already much better than you. Practice is for people like you who aren't very good. Her response didn't surprise me, but it still stung. Despite her confidence, I was determined to give my best performance, even if it meant proving her wrong. I decided that arguing with my mother-in-law wasn't worth it, so I just focused on getting ready for the wedding performance. Once we agreed on which song to sing, I started going to my voice lessons even more often. I was determined not to give my mother-in-law any more reasons to make fun of me, and I was also nervous about performing in front of people after such a long time without proper training. On the day of my sister-in-law's wedding, everything went smoothly during the ceremony, and soon it was time for the entertainment portion. My husband, Eric, took the stage first and started playing his music. Since he plays regularly, he looked completely confident and relaxed. His music was beautiful, and he had a calm, elegant presence that captivated everyone. I couldn't help but admire him as I watched. But then, out of nowhere, my mother-in-law turned to me and said, I'm not feeling well today. Why don't you sing by yourself? I was shocked. What? That's so sudden. You can't just drop this on me. I protested. Well, there's nothing we can do. Or are you too embarrassed to sing in front of everyone because you're uneducated and ugly? She said, without any guilt or hesitation. That's when I realized she was doing this on purpose. She wanted to humiliate me, but I wasn't going to let her get away with it. You know what? I've been practicing hard, so I'm not embarrassed to sing. I asked you several times if you wanted to practice, but you didn't. Could it be that you're the one who's actually afraid of singing in front of everyone? I shot back. My mother-in-law's face turned red with anger. That's not true, she raised her voice, and people around us started to look over, wondering what was happening. I quickly apologized to the people nearby for the commotion, then leaned in closer to her and whispered, for someone who graduated top of their class from a music school, you sure talk a lot about teaching others. Are you backing out because you know I'll sing better than you? She glared at me. Of course not. If I sang with someone as uneducated and ugly as you, it would just throw me off. You and your parents must be really incompetent if this is the best you can do, she sneered, not only insulting me but also my family. I was embarrassed and furious at the same time. I wanted to run out of there, but I knew that's exactly what she wanted. So, instead of backing down, I stood my ground. What are you waiting for? Get up there already, she snapped. Fine, I will, I replied, trying to stay calm. As Eric finished his performance, I stood up and made my way to the stage. Originally, I was supposed to sing with my mother-in-law, but since she claimed she wasn't feeling well, I was on my own. Instead of singing the song we had planned, I decided to sing an opera piece I used to perform a lot in the past, an aria from The Marriage of Figaro. As I started singing, I was amazed at how well I was doing. All the vocal training I had done seemed to pay off, and I hit every note perfectly. My voice was stronger and more beautiful than I had imagined it could be. The audience seemed mesmerized, whispering things like, "Wow, her voice is incredible," and "Is she a professional?" When I finished the song, the room erupted into applause. People stood up, clapping and cheering. I was overwhelmed by the response. I took a moment to address the crowd, saying, "Congratulations on your wedding, sister-in-law. I used to be the choir leader in high school, but it's been a few years since I sang in front of people. I was a bit nervous, but how did I do? Thanks so much for listening." I went back to my seat, feeling proud, and my daughter, Jessica, ran up to me with wide eyes. "Mom, your voice was so beautiful. Can you teach me to sing like that?" she asked eagerly. Just as I was enjoying the moment, my mother-in-law couldn't help but make a snide remark. "Oh, anyone can sing like that. Don't get ahead of yourself," she said, her jealousy showing. I thought the entertainment part of the wedding was over, but then something surprising happened. My sister-in-law stood up and said, "Mom, I'd love for you to sing too." My mother-in-law looked completely caught off guard.
"What? Me?" she stammered.
"Yes, I've never heard you sing before, Mom, and since you taught me so much about music growing up, I'd really like to hear you perform," my sister-in-law said, completely sincere. The guests around us started chiming in. "Yes, you should sing. We've heard you were the top student at your music school." With all eyes on her, my mother-in-law had no choice but to agree. "All right, if you all insist," she said, standing up and making her way to the stage. As she stepped up, the room was buzzing with excitement. Everyone expected an incredible performance from her. But as soon as she started singing, something strange happened. There were murmurs in the crowd. People were whispering, "Wait, is she serious? No way." Her voice, which was supposed to be polished and professional, was shaky and off-key. It was nothing like the performance people had imagined from someone with her credentials. I sat back in my chair, feeling a mix of shock and vindication. My mother-in-law, who had spent years boasting about her musical achievements and belittling others, was faltering in front of everyone. She finished her song to scattered applause, far from the standing ovation I had received. When she returned to her seat, she looked completely deflated. For once, she didn't have anything critical to say. After the wedding, things changed. My mother-in-law stopped criticizing me about my singing, and she didn't bring up teaching Jessica anymore. It was as if she had finally realized that her harsh ways weren't the only way to succeed in music or in life. And as for me, I felt like I had finally stood up to her, proving to myself that I didn't need her approval to be confident in my abilities. The performance had given me back the confidence I hadn't realized I had lost. I couldn't help but notice how off my mother-in-law's voice was during her performance. Even considering that, her singing was terrible. For someone who loved to criticize others' singing, she sure struggled to hit the right notes. To be honest, I felt like I was a much better singer. The atmosphere grew uncomfortable as she finished her performance. Unlike when I sang, the room was filled with awkward silence, and the applause was scattered. It was as if people wished they hadn't witnessed it. When my mother-in-law returned to our table, her face red with embarrassment, she angrily said to me, "This is why I didn't want to sing. If you had sung properly, my daughter wouldn't have asked me to do this." I was confused. I thought my sister-in-law had genuinely wanted her mother to sing at her wedding. She had been taught by her mother for years and probably wanted to share that moment. "Don't you think she genuinely wanted you to sing?" I asked, trying to calm her down. "No way. I'm sure she knew I was bad at singing and just wanted to embarrass me," she snapped. I was shocked. Here was a woman who constantly criticized others, yet she didn't want to perform because she knew she wasn't good. She would judge others but couldn't handle being judged herself. I realized that her self-centered attitude could even crush my daughter's love for music. Unable to hold back anymore, I replied with sarcasm, "So, a person who graduated from a top music school can only criticize others because they can't sing themselves? Well, at least you didn't have to sing with someone as terrible as me."
"How dare you say that?"
"It's your fault I embarrassed myself in front of everyone," she shouted. "It's not fair to say that in front of your daughter." I'm sure she's happy just hearing you sing, I said firmly. My mother-in-law fell silent, and there was a murmur among the guests who had overheard our conversation. The rest of the ceremony went smoothly, but it was clear that my mother-in-law wasn't happy. 2 days later, she stormed into our house, demanding an apology. I can't let it go. You need to apologize for what happened at the wedding. I was taken aback. What exactly am I apologizing for? I didn't realize your singing was that bad. If anything, you owe an apology to Jessica.
What?
I have nothing to apologize for, she yelled. Not to me, to Jessica. She almost started hating music because of how harsh you were with her. You've always bragged about your music education, but is this really what you learned at that school? Tormenting a child because things don't go your way. I shot back. I continued. I've never been trained by you, yet I managed to sing at the wedding and got applause. How about I give you some singing lessons? My mother-in-law stood there, speechless. I had finally stood up to her in a way she couldn't argue with. If you have nothing else to say, please leave. I won't let you interfere with my daughter's or my husband's music anymore. Without another word, she left the house, her shoulders slumped in defeat. I felt a wave of satisfaction. I had fought back in the one area where she always tried to lord over me, music. All those years of voice training paid off. Without it, I wouldn't have been able to receive the applause I got at the wedding, and I certainly wouldn't have been able to hold my ground against her. Since the wedding, things have changed. My mother-in-law still visits occasionally, but she no longer makes snide comments about my daughter's singing. I don't mind her visits now because the constant criticism has stopped. My daughter Jessica, who has been practicing hard, is working on a challenging song from her music class. Mom, this song is tough, but I'm going to practice until I can sing it perfectly, Jessica said, determined. That's great, honey. You're going to do so well. I encouraged her, even though I didn't fully understand the technical difficulties of the song. It made me proud just to see her working so hard. One day, while my mother-in-law was visiting, she overheard Jessica and me talking about the song. Emily, this song is difficult. You can't just tell her to do her best. Jessica, let me show you how to sing it properly, she said, surprisingly kind and patient as she gave Jessica some advice. Oh, thank you, Grandma. It's easier now, Jessica said, happy to receive her help. This was a different side of my mother-in-law. She had always looked down on people who didn't go to music school, but now, after seeing how I could sing without formal training, she seemed to have a change of heart. Emily, I used to think that only people with degrees in music were good enough. But after seeing you perform, I've realized that music is about enjoying it, not about where you studied. Could you teach me to sing next time? She asked, surprising me. I couldn't help but smile. The sarcastic comment I made after the wedding must have had an effect on her. Well, I teach tough lessons, I joked. I won't be harsh anymore, I promise. I even feel sorry for Eric now, but it's too late to change the past. I'm ready for your tough lessons, she replied, a little sheepishly. With that, the tension between us started to ease. We even began going to karaoke together and became close enough to enjoy singing together. I hope that one day, when Jessica improves even more, the four of us, me, Eric, Jessica, and my mother-in-law, can have a fun jam session together.